Have you ever felt invisible, judged by your job, your uniform, your name tag, and dismissed before you've even spoken a word? We've all been there. But what happens when that dismissal comes from a man who could buy the entire city block you're standing on? This is the story of Alara Vance, a waitress drowning in debt and family tragedy, who served a table to one of New York's most ruthless billionaires. He thought his money gave him the right to humiliate her in front of a packed five-star restaurant. But he never imagined that the quiet woman refilling his water glass held a secret that would not only silence him, but change her life forever. The ache in Alara Vance's feet was a familiar language, a dull, throbbing dialect that spoke of 12-hour shifts, unforgiving marble floors, and the relentless gravity of her own life. It started in her arches, a low hum of protest, and by the end of the night, it would be a screaming crescendo in her lower back. At 28, she felt ancient. Her world was a 50-table universe named L'Ambroisie, a temple of modern French cuisine in the heart of Manhattan, where the entrees cost more than her weekly groceries. It was a place of hushed tones, of discreetly powerful people making discreetly powerful deals over plates of seared scallops with truffle foam. The air itself seemed expensive, a carefully curated blend of beeswax, roasting duck, and the faint, clean scent of ironed linen. Alara's life outside these hallowed walls was anything but curated. It was a chaotic scramble of bus transfers to a cramped Queens apartment, a stack of ever-growing medical bills on her kitchen counter, and the constant, low-grade fear that hummed beneath her ribs. Her mother, a woman who once filled their small home with the smell of baking bread and the sound of laughter, was now a quiet resident of the Northwood Skilled Nursing Facility, her mind a beautiful, intricate tapestry slowly being unraveled by early-onset Alzheimer's. The bills for Northwood were astronomical, a black hole that swallowed every dollar Alara earned and then some. So she worked. She worked doubles. She took the shifts no one else wanted. She became a ghost in the machine of fine dining, her movements economical and precise, her smile a carefully maintained mask of pleasant neutrality. Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slower evening, but a favorable review in the New York Times had turned it into a full-blown Saturday. The kitchen doors swung open and closed with violent precision, releasing bursts of steam and the sound of Chef Antoine's staccato commands. Alara, table 7 needs their check. Table 12 wants more bread. And watch out for 19. The wife is asking if the ortolan is ethically sourced. Handle it, barked Mr. Dubois, the manager. He was a severe man with a hawk-like nose and hair slicked back so tightly it seemed to pull his face into a permanent state of disapproval. He was also a stickler for authenticity, a Parisian transplant who viewed most American attempts at French culture with thinly veiled contempt. Yes, Mr. Dubois, Alara murmured, scooping up a silver bread basket. Table 19 was a challenge. The husband looked bored, scrolling through his phone, while the wife grilled Alara with the intensity of a prosecutor. I've read about the tradition, the woman said, her voice dripping with sanctimonious concern, and I simply cannot support a dish that involves, well, you know. Alara knew. She also knew that L'Ambroisie hadn't served the controversial dish in decades, but they kept a classic name on the menu as a nod to tradition, replacing the songbird with a more palatable quail preparation. She explained this calmly, her voice a low, steady murmur. She described the quail, the Armagnac-soaked figs, the delicate pastry shell. Her description was so vivid, so imbued with a quiet respect for the food, that the woman's suspicion melted into intrigue. Oh, she said, deflated. Well, that sounds lovely, actually. She took the order and retreated, the smile never leaving her face until she was through the swinging doors of the kitchen. There, for a brief second, she leaned against the cool stainless steel, closing her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't in a chaotic kitchen. She was back in the hushed, dusty stacks of the library at Columbia University, the scent of old paper and binding glue in the air. She could feel the weight of a heavy linguistics textbook in her hands, the thrill of tracing a single word's journey across centuries and continents. She had been Dr. Alara Vance almost. Her dissertation, The Phonetic Drift of Post-Norman Conquest, Anglo-Norman French, had been a thing of beauty, a passion project that had consumed her early 20s. Her thesis advisor, the renowned Dr. Albright, had called her his most promising student. He told her she had a gift, an ear for the subtle music of language that few possessed. Then the phone call had come. The diagnosis. The terrifyingly rapid decline. Her father had passed away years ago, leaving only Alara to manage the crisis. The dissertation was abandoned. The world of academia, with its modest stipends and future promises, was a luxury she could no longer afford. The world of immediate cash, of tips, of doubles, of the relentless ache in her feet, was the only world that mattered now. "Vance, stop daydreaming!" Dubois' voice cut through her reverie. "The Blackwood reservation just arrived. Table 14. The corner booth. You're up." Alara's stomach tightened. Table 14. Sterling Blackwood. She knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. He was a titan of private equity, a corporate raider famous for his ruthless takeovers and his even more ruthless personality. He was new money that had aged into something harder, more jagged. He frequented the restaurant, and his reputation among the staff was legendarily toxic. He was a known poor tipper, a serial complainer, and a man who seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from making service staff squirm. She straightened her apron, smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her black vest, and composed her features back into the mask of serene professionalism. Taking a deep breath, she picked up 2 leather-bound menus and pushed through the kitchen doors, walking toward the corner booth where the shark was waiting. Sterling Blackwood did not sit in a restaurant. He occupied it. He was a man built of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, his suit a custom-made Xenia that probably cost more than Alara's car. A Patek Philippe watch, the Nautilus 570111 with its Tiffany blue face, glimmered on his wrist as he gestured impatiently at the hostess. He wasn't just a customer. He was a center of gravity, pulling the energy of the room toward him, bending it to his will. Beside him, a woman who looked to be about 22 was artfully arranging herself in the booth. She was stunning in a way that seemed both genetically blessed and surgically enhanced, a perfect specimen of the modern Manhattan elite. Her name, Alara would soon learn, was Tiffany. She was draped in a silk dress the color of champagne and fiddled with a diamond bracelet that scattered prisms of light across the tablecloth. "Is the air conditioning always this aggressive?" Blackwood's voice was a low growl, directed at no one and everyone. "I'm not paying $1,000 for dinner to feel like I'm in a meat locker." The young hostess stammered an apology. "I can ask them to adjust it, sir." "Don't ask. Do it," he snapped, dismissing her with a flick of his wrist. This was the man Alara now had to face. She approached the table, her steps measured and silent on the plush carpet. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and even. "Welcome to L'Ambroisie. My name is Alara, and I will be your server this evening." Blackwood didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Tiffany, but he wasn't really seeing her either. He was performing, using her as a mirror for his own importance. "Alara," he said, tasting the name with a faint hint of derision, "bring us 2 glasses of the Billionaire Salmon Rosé, the 2008, and don't you dare bring it out if it's not chilled to precisely 45 degrees. I'll know." "Of course, sir," Alara replied, her professional mask firmly in place. She didn't write it down. The Billionaire Salmon 2008 was a prestige cuvée, and his temperature demand, while absurdly specific, was not impossible. She prided herself on her memory, a skill honed by years of academic discipline. It was one of the few parts of her old life she could still use. As she turned to leave, Tiffany spoke for the first time, her voice a high, breathy whisper. "Oh, Sterling, look, they have escargots, just like that little place we went to in Paris." Blackwood scoffed. "Tiffany, darling, that wasn't Paris. That was the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas. And believe me, there's a difference." He finally turned his gaze toward Alara, his eyes a chilling shade of pale blue. "Let's hope your kitchen knows the difference too." The barb was meant to sting, to establish the hierarchy from the outset. He was the discerning patron, she was the lowly servant. Alara simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and walked away. At the service station, she relayed the drink order to the sommelier, Jean-Pierre, a wiry Frenchman with a perpetually worried expression. Blackwood? Jean-Pierre whispered, polishing a glass with frantic energy. Table 14? Bonne chance, my friend. Last time he was here, he claimed the Mouton Rothschild was corked. It was a perfect bottle. He just wanted a discount. I'll handle it, Alara said, her voice more confident than she felt. She returned with the champagne, presenting the bottle to Blackwood as protocol dictated. He waved a dismissive hand. Just pour it. She poured a small amount for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it with an exaggerated air of a connoisseur, and took a small sip. He held the liquid in his mouth for a long moment, his eyes closed as if communing with the spirit of the grapes. It's acceptable, he finally declared, a pronouncement delivered with the gravity of a papal bull. Barely. Ilara filled their flutes and placed the bottle in a silver ice bucket beside the table. Her movements were fluid, graceful, betraying none of the tension coiling in her gut. She was used to difficult customers, but Blackwood was in another league. He wasn't just demanding, he was cruel. He seemed to be actively searching for flaws, for any crack in the facade of service he could exploit for his own amusement. So, he said to Tiffany, loud enough for Ilara and the surrounding tables to hear, I closed the Apex deal today. Tiffany's eyes lit up. The big one? The one you've been working on for months? The very same, he said, taking a triumphant sip of champagne. Henderson thought he had me cornered. Tried to play hardball. I had my team dig up some dirt on one of his board members. A little indiscretion in the Caymans. Amazing how quickly a man's negotiating position softens when faced with a federal investigation. He laughed, a short barking sound devoid of any real humor. He was boasting about ruining someone's life as casually as he'd ordered his champagne. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This man's power was a destructive force, a wrecking ball he swung for sport. Are you ready to hear about the specials? Ilara began, stepping forward. Or would you like a few more moments? Blackwood cut her off, his eyes narrowing. Do you know who I am? The question was so abrupt, so nakedly arrogant, that it momentarily stunned her. You are Mr. Blackwood, sir. That's right, I am. And when I am ready for the specials, I will let you know. Until then, you can just stand over there, out of the way, and try to look less stressed. It's ruining the ambiance. He gestured to a spot a few feet from the table, as if she were a piece of furniture to be rearranged. Every instinct screamed at her to say something, to throw the ice bucket at his perfectly coiffed head, but the image of her mother's pale, gentle face flashed in her mind. The thought of the Northwood facility's monthly invoice, sitting on her counter like a ticking bomb. So she swallowed her pride, the bitter taste coating her tongue. She took 3 steps back, clasped her hands behind her back, and assumed the position he had commanded. She became a statue, a silent observer in the theater of his ego, waiting for her next cue. And as she waited, she listened, her academic mind automatically deconstructing his speech, his grammar, his carefully constructed persona of power. And she began to notice the cracks. For the next 20 minutes, Ilara stood in her designated spot, a silent sentinel to Sterling Blackwood's monologue. He held court, boasting about his business acumen, his recent acquisition of a vintage Ferrari, and the sheer incompetence of everyone he employed. Tiffany played her part beautifully, offering gasps of admiration and doe-eyed gazes at all the right moments. The problem with people today, Blackwood declared, swirling his champagne, is a lack of culture, a lack of appreciation for the finer things. They've been raised on fast food and reality television. They have no substance. Ilara's gaze drifted for a moment to the table adjacent to them. A quiet older couple was celebrating an anniversary. The man was explaining something on the menu to his wife, his voice soft, his hand gently resting on hers. They had a shared history, a quiet dignity that Blackwood, for all his wealth, could never purchase. That, Ilara thought, was substance. Her attention snapped back to her own table when Blackwood finally summoned her with a sharp snap of his fingers. The sound cut through the restaurant's genteel hum, causing heads at nearby tables to turn. We're ready now, he announced as if granting her a royal audience. Walk us through the menu. Ilara stepped forward, the professional mask once again firmly in place. Of course, sir. Tonight, Chef Antoine is particularly proud of our seared duck liver with a fig and balsamic reduction. Stop, Blackwood interrupted. He picked up his menu, holding it like a shield. I don't need the sales pitch. I'm a man who knows what he wants. He scanned the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was then that Alara noticed something interesting. For all his posturing about culture and sophistication, his eyes were darting across the menu with a flicker of uncertainty. He wasn't reading. He was searching for familiar words. Filet, chicken, lobster. He was like a student trying to bluff his way through a test for a class he'd never attended. His entire persona was a meticulously crafted, but ultimately hollow imitation of old world class. He was a man playing a part, and he was terrified of someone discovering he hadn't memorized all his lines. I think, Tiffany said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at an item on the menu, I'll have the coquille Saint-Jacques. Her pronunciation was a mangled mess, a car crash of phonetics. A smirk played on Blackwood's lips. It was a cruel, condescending expression. Darling, he said, his voice dripping with false patience, it's pronounced coquille Saint-Jacques. It's not that difficult. He said it with an air of authority, but his own attempt at refinement was clumsy, a heavy, awkward performance meant to impress someone who didn't know better. Ilara's mind, the mind of a trained linguist, cataloged the errors instantly. It was the linguistic equivalent of a child drawing a stick figure and calling it the Mona Lisa, but her face remained impassive. An excellent choice, madam, she said to Tiffany, her tone even. The scallops are flown in from the Bay of Fundy this morning. Blackwood, emboldened by his correction of Tiffany, turned his focus back to the menu, his arrogance swelling. He had successfully asserted his dominance over his date. Now it was the waitress's turn. He saw Ilara not as a person, but as a prop in his performance. He decided to order for them both, a classic power move. He would do it in the most theatrical way possible, to cement his image as a worldly, cultured man in Tiffany's eyes and put the serving girl firmly in her place. He cleared his throat, puffed out his chest, and began to speak. We will start with the pâté of duck liver, he announced, mangling the words, and the onion soup. Ilara's mind translated automatically, but her pen hovered over her notepad. She didn't write anything yet. She waited. For the main course, he continued, gaining momentum, the lady will have the scallops you discussed. And he paused for dramatic effect, his finger landing on the most expensive item on the menu, a rack of lamb with a parsley crust. I will have the Carrie D. Agnew person laid. It was a train wreck. To anyone with knowledge of fine dining, it was gibberish. It was like ordering a filet mignon or a chocolate mousse. Ilara maintained her composure, but inwardly a strange calm was settling over her. The years of swallowing her pride, of nodding and smiling at condescending patrons, of feeling invisible, it all began to coalesce into a single point of cold, clear resolve. This man, this hollow performance of a man, was not going to break her. She looked at him, her expression neutral. I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat that last item for me? It was a simple, professional request, but to Sterling Blackwood, it was a challenge. It implied he had been unclear. It was a crack in his armor. His face, which had been smug and self-satisfied, began to cloud over. Are you deaf? He snapped. The Carrie D. Agnew. The lamb. Is that too complicated for you? Not at all, sir, Ilara replied, her voice still infuriatingly calm. I just want to ensure I get your order exactly right. The lamb, of course. And how would you like that prepared? Medium rare, he spat, his eyes narrowing into slits. And for God's sake, try to keep up. He had recovered, but he was rattled. She had seen behind the curtain, and he knew it. The rest of the evening would be a battle of wills, a silent war waged across a landscape of linen and silverware. He was now looking for a reason to escalate, a reason to punish her for her perceived insolence. And Ilara, exhausted and pushed to the brink, knew he would find one. The appetizers arrived. Ilara served them with practiced efficiency, placing the plates down without a sound, her movements a study in professional grace. Blackwood watched her every move, his eyes like a hawk's, searching for a flaw. He found one in the onion soup. There's not enough cheese, he declared, pushing the bowl an inch away from him. A proper French onion soup should have a thick, gratinated crust of Gruyere. This is pathetic. I can have the kitchen add more for you, sir, Alara offered, her voice a placid lake in the face of his storm. Don't bother, he sneered. The moment is ruined. Just clear it. He had barely touched it. He hadn't wanted more cheese. He had wanted a complaint. He had wanted to confirm his narrative of incompetence, to find an outlet for the simmering rage he felt at being subtly challenged. Tiffany, sensing the shift in mood, tried to placate him. Sterling, my pâté is delicious. Try some. I've lost my appetite, he muttered, taking a large gulp of a new wine he had ordered. A 2010 Chateau Margaux. A wine so expensive and complex it felt wasted on his brutish palate. He'd made a show of sending the first bottle back, claiming it was tight, forcing Jean-Pierre to decant a second one with trembling hands. The restaurant was now at its peak capacity. The ambient noise was a symphony of clinking glasses, hushed conversations, and distant kitchen clamor. It was a public stage, and Blackwood was about to make Alara the star of a tragedy. The main courses were ready. Alara carried the two large plates from the kitchen, her arms aching slightly from their weight. She approached the table, her senses on high alert. She served Tiffany first, placing the beautifully seared scallops before her. Then she turned to Blackwood. And your carré d'agneau, sir, she said, setting the plate down. The lamb was cooked to a perfect medium rare, fanned out artfully next to a swirl of potato puree and tender crisp haricots verts. It was a work of art. Blackwood stared at the plate for a long, dramatic moment. He picked up his fork and nudged one of the lamb chops. Then he looked up at Alara, and a slow, venomous smile spread across his face. This isn't what I ordered, he said, his voice dangerously low. Alara blinked. Sir, this is the carré d'agneau persillade, prepared medium rare, as you requested. No, he said, pushing the plate fully away from him. This isn't it. I wanted something else, something you clearly weren't capable of understanding. He was rewriting history, gaslighting her in real time. Tiffany looked confused. Sterling, that's what you pointed to. Be quiet, Tiffany, he hissed, not taking his eyes off Alara. Our waitress here seems to have a comprehension problem. Maybe it's the language barrier. He picked up the menu again, his knuckles white. He opened it to the meat section and jabbed a finger at the exact item she had just served him. I tried to make it simple for you. I even tried to speak your restaurant's language to help you out, he said, his voice rising in volume, attracting the attention of the surrounding tables. An uncomfortable silence began to spread from their corner booth, like a ripple in a pond. But it's obvious that's beyond you, he continued, his voice now a full-throated declaration for the whole room to hear. You're just a waitress after all. What was I thinking? He looked from Alara to Tiffany, then to the other patrons who were now openly staring. He was building to his crescendo, a public execution of her dignity. He stood up slightly, leaning over the table for maximum effect. He slammed the menu down on the table. The sound cracked through the hushed dining room like a gunshot. Forget it, he boomed, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent space. The whole order is wrong because you can't be bothered to listen. It's all just meaningless scribbles to you, isn't it? He then pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Alara's face. She can't even read the menu. The words hung in the air, vibrating with pure, unadulterated cruelty. Every eye in the restaurant, patrons, busboys, even Mr. Dubois, who was now striding purposefully from his station near the entrance, was fixed on Alara. Her face was burning, a hot flush of shame and fury rising from her chest. In that moment, she was not Alara Vance, the near PhD, the scholar of Romance languages. She was just what he said she was, a waitress, humiliated, exposed, and utterly powerless. He sat back down, a triumphant smirk on his face. He had won. He had broken her. He had put the little girl in her place in front of 50 witnesses. He folded his hands, expecting tears, an apology, a panicked retreat to the kitchen. He got none of it. Alara stood perfectly still for a beat, the sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull roar in her ears. The face of her mother, the stack of bills, the years of quiet desperation, it all swirled within her. And then something snapped, not loudly, but with the clean, quiet finality of a lock clicking into place. The professional mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The placid lake of her voice was about to become a tidal wave. She took a small, deliberate breath. She straightened her back, and when she looked at Sterling Blackwood, the timid, accommodating waitress was gone. In her place stood someone he had never met, and someone he would never, ever forget. For a full 5 seconds, Alara said nothing. She simply looked at Sterling Blackwood, her eyes once professionally deferential, now holding a direct and unnervingly analytical gaze. The smirk on Blackwood's face faltered slightly. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. Mr. Dubois was now halfway to the table, his face a thunderous mask of managerial fury, ready to intervene, to apologize, to do whatever it took to placate the billionaire. But Alara held up a single steady hand, a gesture not to Blackwood, but to her manager. It was a gesture of such quiet, unassailable authority that Dubois froze mid-stride. Then she turned her full attention back to the man in the booth. When she spoke, her voice was different. The soft, placid tone was gone, replaced by something crisp, clear, and resonant. A current of energy seemed to flow from her, silencing the whispers that had started to ripple through the room. And then the torrent began. A cascade of perfect, liquid, Parisian-accented words flowed from her lips. It was not the clumsy, brutalized version Blackwood had attempted. This was the genuine article. It was the language of the Sorbonne, of the hushed halls of the Académie Française, of rainy afternoons spent in left-bank cafes debating philosophy. It was flawless. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The sheer, shocking beauty of her speech commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Jean-Pierre, the sommelier, who had crept out from behind the bar, stood with his mouth agape, a polishing cloth frozen in his hand. The kitchen staff, drawn by the commotion, were peering through the circular windows of the swinging doors, their eyes wide, because she wasn't using French to apologize. She was using it to dissect him. Though the words were foreign to most in the room, her meaning was brutally clear, conveyed through the precise, surgical tone of her voice and the unwavering intensity of her gaze. She began in this beautiful, flowing language by correcting his pronunciation. Not mockingly, but with the cold, detached precision of a professor correcting a particularly inept student. She deconstructed his every phonetic error, explaining the proper placement of the tongue for the uvular or the subtle nasal tones he had completely missed, the way his clumsy syllables had transformed a masterpiece of cuisine into utter nonsense. Sterling Blackwood's face, which had been a mask of smug triumph, began to drain of color. He understood enough to know he was being systematically dismantled. Tiffany stared at him, then at Alara, her perfectly painted mouth hanging open in disbelief. Alara didn't stop there. She gestured to the menu he had slammed on the table. Still speaking in this incredible, uninterrupted flow, she began to recite it, not just the names of the dishes, but their history. She spoke of the origins of the foie gras, its journey from ancient Egypt to the tables of French kings. She discussed the specific terroir of the Margaux he was drinking, noting its blend of grapes and the subtle notes of violet and black currant that his brutish palate had surely missed. Then she addressed his rejected dish. She described with the vocabulary of a master chef exactly how the herb-crusted rack of lamb was prepared. She spoke of the precise temperature of the sous vide bath used to ensure its tenderness, the blend of herbs, parsley, garlic, thyme, rosemary, that comprised the crust, the exact method for searing the fat cap to a perfect golden crisp. Her description was so vivid, so passionate, it was an ode, a love poem to the very plate of food he had dismissed as slop. Her speech lasted for perhaps 90 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The entire restaurant was captivated, held in a state of suspended animation. The only sound was her voice, a silver bell ringing with the clarity of absolute truth. Finally, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a more intimate, but no less potent, level. The final part of her speech was clearly for him and him alone. Her tone softened, but it was the softness of a razor's edge. And though she spoke in a language he barely understood, the universal words for arrogance, insecurity, and charade seemed to hang in the air around his head. She spoke of men who use wealth as a shield for their own profound emptiness, who mistake cruelty for strength, and who believe that culture can be purchased rather than earned. Then seamlessly, without a single breath of hesitation, she switched back to perfect, unaccented English. "The lamb, sir," she said, her voice now calm and quiet, "is cooked to a textbook medium rare, exactly as you requested it in your particular dialect. Perhaps your palate is simply not as sophisticated as your wallet. Would you like me to bring you a cheeseburger instead? I believe I could translate that for the chef, if you'd like." Silence. A deep, profound, and absolute silence fell over Lambrossi. Sterling Blackwood sat as if he'd been turned to stone. His face was a ghastly shade of pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He was a king who had been stripped bare in front of his entire court. He had tried to humiliate a waitress and had instead been intellectually and linguistically annihilated. Then, from the anniversary table, the old man who had been speaking so gently to his wife began to clap. It started as a slow, deliberate applause. His wife joined in, then another table, and another. Within seconds, the entire dining room, with the exception of Blackwood's corner, had erupted in a wave of spontaneous, thunderous applause. It wasn't just for the spectacle, it was for the vindication of every service worker who had ever been treated as less than human. It was for her. Ilara simply stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs, a strange lightness filling her chest. She had not raised her voice, she had not thrown a punch, but she had won the fight of her life. The applause eventually subsided, leaving behind an even more awkward and charged silence. Sterling Blackwood looked like a man who had just been in a car crash. He fumbled for his wallet, his hands trembling slightly. Without a word, he threw several $100 bills onto the table, far more than the cost of the meal, and practically bolted from his seat. "Sterling, wait!" Tiffany called out, scrambling to gather her purse. She shot Ilara a look that was a strange cocktail of awe, fear, and something that looked almost like admiration, before scurrying after him. They disappeared out the front door, leaving a half-eaten plate of scallops and a shattered ego in their wake. The moment they were gone, the restaurant seemed to exhale. A buzz of conversation immediately started up, everyone dissecting what they had just witnessed. Mr. Dubois finally moved, walking slowly towards Ilara. His usual stern expression was gone, replaced by one of pure, unadulterated astonishment. He stopped in front of her, looking at her as if for the first time. "Vance," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He was a native of Lyon, and he had understood every single perfectly chosen word she had spoken. "In my 20 years of managing restaurants, in Paris, in Monaco, in New York, I have never seen anything like that." Ilara finally let out the breath she felt she'd been holding for an hour. "He was unacceptable, Mr. Dubois. I apologize if I overstepped." Dubois let out a short, sharp laugh. "Overstepped? Mademoiselle, you built a whole new staircase. Where on earth did you learn to speak like that? Your accent is purer than my own." "I studied," Ilara said simply, the understatement of the century. "You didn't just study," Dubois corrected her. "That was mastery." He looked around the still buzzing dining room, then back at her. "Go to the staff room. Take a break. Take the rest of the night off if you want. Paid, of course." As Ilara turned to walk away, a woman from another table stood up and approached her. She was elegant, in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the silver hair cut in a stylish bob. She was dressed in a tasteful but clearly expensive Chanel jacket. Ilara recognized her as one of the diners who had started clapping. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice warm and authoritative. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance." Ilara's head snapped up. "Vance? That's my name too." Dr. Vance smiled. "A fortuitous coincidence, perhaps. I'm the Dean of Humanities at Columbia University." Ilara felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Columbia. It was like a ghost from her past had just walked up and introduced itself. "I have to tell you," the dean continued, "your command of the language was not just impressive, it was academic. The precision, the etymological depth. You weren't just speaking, you were delivering a lecture. May I ask where you did your studies?" I was a doctoral candidate at Columbia," Ilara confessed. the words feeling strange in her mouth. In the linguistics department, under Dr. Albright. Dean Vance's eyes widened in recognition. William Albright? A dear colleague. He spoke often of a brilliant student he lost to a family emergency a few years ago. He was devastated. He said she had the most promising mind he'd encountered in a decade. The dean looked Alara up and down, connecting the dots. My God, that was you. Alara could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. Dean Vance reached into her handbag and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. I don't know your circumstances and it's none of my business, she said, pressing the card into Alara's hand. But a mind like yours does not belong clearing tables for bullies like Sterling Blackwood. That mind belongs with us. Call my office. We'll have lunch. We'll talk. There are fellowships, research grants. There are always ways back for talent like yours. Always. Alara stared at the embossed card in her hand. Dr. Eleanor Vance, Dean of Humanities, Columbia University. It felt heavier than a gold bar. It felt like a key. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. No, the dean said, patting her arm gently. Thank you. I haven't enjoyed dinner theater that much in years. With a final encouraging smile, the dean returned to her table. Alara walked toward the kitchen in a daze, the business card clutched in her hand. As she pushed through the doors, her fellow servers and the kitchen staff erupted into cheers. Jean-Pierre rushed over and gave her a hug. You are my hero, he declared. Chef Antoine, a notoriously grumpy man, gave her a rare wide grin and a nod of deep respect. She finally made it to the small, cluttered staff room and sank onto a rickety chair, her legs suddenly feeling like jelly. She laid the business card on the table and just stared at it. It was a lifeline, a glimpse of a world she thought she had lost forever. A few minutes later, Mr. Dubois came in. He was holding a small folded piece of paper. This was with the money Blackwood left, he said, handing it to her. It's for you. Alara unfolded it. It was a sheet of paper torn from a pocket notebook. Scrawled on it in angry, hurried script were just 3 words. You were right. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a concession, a white flag from a vanquished foe. Alara looked at the note, then at the business card. The note was an ending. The card was a beginning. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on her chest felt a little bit lighter. The ache in her feet was still there. But tonight, she felt like she could fly. The morning after her confrontation with Sterling Blackwood, Alara awoke to a world that felt fundamentally altered. The familiar gray light of Queens filtered through her window. The sounds of the city stirring outside were the same. But within her, a tectonic shift had occurred. The dull, persistent ache of dread that had been her constant companion for years had been replaced by a fragile, yet fiercely burning ember of hope. On her nightstand, Dean Vance's business card lay next to Blackwood's 3-word concession. One was a closed door, the other a key. She went to work that evening with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She found Mr. Dubois in his small, cluttered office, poring over inventory sheets. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening when he saw it was her. Vance, he said, setting down his pen, I trust you are feeling better after last night's performance. I am, thank you, she said, her voice steady. Mr. Dubois, I've come to give you my 2 weeks' notice. Dubois leaned back in his chair, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face, though he didn't seem surprised. I see, he said quietly. Is it because of what happened? I assure you, Blackwood will not be dining with us again. I have already spoken to his assistant. He is, as they say, an unwelcome person. I appreciate that more than you know. But it's not because of him, it's because of me. She placed the business card on his desk. An opportunity has come up, a chance to go back to a life I left behind. He picked up the card, reading the embossed text from Columbia University. He let out a low whistle. Dean of Humanities. So the stories are true. You are more than you seem. He placed the card back on the desk with a reverence that surprised her. I cannot say I am happy to lose you. You are the best I have. But I would be a fool to stand in your way. He paused, a calculated look in his eyes. However, let me make a proposal before you finalize your decision. L'Ambroisie is not Columbia. I know this. But there is honor and a deep tradition in this work as well. I have been looking for a new floor manager, someone to train as my successor. The position comes with a substantial salary, full benefits, and yearly trips to the vineyards in Burgundy and Bordeaux. Your palate, your memory, your grace under pressure, and your language skills, he gave a small, wry smile, make you the ideal candidate. You would not be a waitress, Alara. You would be a guardian of this craft. A year ago, the offer would have been a lifeline, an unimaginable dream. A stable career, respect, travel. Even now, a part of her, the pragmatic part that knew the relentless terror of medical bills, was tempted. It was the safe path, the known quantity. She thought of the easy camaraderie in the kitchen, of Jean-Pierre's anxious humor, of the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly executed service. But then she thought of the weight of a rare book in her hands, the thrill of tracing a word's lineage through time, the scent of the university library. That was not a job. It was her soul. "That is an incredibly generous offer, Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "And I am honored. But my path lies elsewhere. I have to see it through." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. "I understand. Academia's gain is my restaurant's great loss. Your final day will be 2 weeks from today." The days that followed were filled with a nervous energy. Alara's hands trembled as she dialed the number on the business card. The dean's assistant was warm and efficient, scheduling a meeting for the following Tuesday. Waiting for that day felt like holding her breath for a week. She spent her nights not watching television, but digging through the dusty boxes under her bed. Inside were her old textbooks, her notes, and the half-finished chapters of her dissertation. She ran her fingers over the pages, the complex theories and linguistic trees feeling like conversations with an old beloved friend she had neglected for too long. When Tuesday arrived, she took the subway to Manhattan, but instead of heading to the restaurant, she walked the familiar blocks to the Columbia campus. Stepping through the wrought iron gates was like stepping into a parallel life. Students with backpacks hurried along the paths, their faces alight with debate and discovery. The air smelled of old stone, autumn leaves, and possibility. She was a ghost visiting her own past, a past she now dared to believe could also be her future. Dean Vance's office was a sanctuary of intellect. The walls were lined not with awards, but with books, thousands of them overflowing from shelves and stacked neatly on the floor. Alara felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling of coming home. "Alara, please come in," the dean said, rising from behind a large mahogany desk. "Tea?" For the next hour they talked. The dean didn't pry. She asked thoughtful, intelligent questions. She wanted to know about Alara's dissertation, about Dr. Albright, about the specific challenges of tracing phonetic drift in medieval texts. It wasn't an interrogation or an interview. It was a conversation between two scholars. Emboldened, Alara found herself telling the whole story. The shock of her mother's diagnosis, the crushing weight of the medical system, the quiet desperation that had led her to l'Ambroisie. "The world is designed to make us believe that our circumstances define our intellect," Dean Vance said, her gaze steady and compassionate. "It is a pernicious lie. A brilliant mind is a brilliant mind, whether it is in a library or a four-star restaurant." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "Dr. Albright has never quite gotten over losing you as a student. He is currently working on a major project funded by the Atherton Grant, a comparative study of Norman linguistic influence in England and Sicily. It is a massive undertaking, and he is desperately in need of a lead research associate. Someone with your specific background would not just be helpful, they would be essential." The dean laid out the offer. It was a formal position with a respectable salary, full university benefits that would revolutionize her mother's care, and a complete tuition waiver to finish her doctorate. "It will not be easy," the dean cautioned, "but we believe it is where you belong." Tears welled in Alara's eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, soul-shaking relief. It was real. This was happening. "I accept," she whispered, the words feeling like the most important she had ever spoken. Her final 2 weeks at the restaurant were a strange, bittersweet farewell tour. On her last night, the anniversary couple came in again. The husband spotted her across the room and waved her over. "We saw you on your first night," his wife said warmly, her hand on her husband's, "and we're here on your last. We wish you all the best in your new chapter." After the last patrons had left, the staff surprised her. The lights in the main dining room came up and the whole crew, cooks, dishwashers, servers, busboys, was gathered with a makeshift cake. Jean-Pierre gave a rambling, heartfelt toast, calling her the Joan of Arc of the service industry. Chef Antoine, a man of few words, emerged from the kitchen and handed her a signed copy of his cookbook. Inside he had written, "Excellence is excellence in any language. Go show them." Mr. Dubois presented her with a dusty bottle of 1998 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. "For the day you defend your dissertation," he said, clapping her on the shoulder. Leaving L'Ambroisie for the last time, she felt a pang of nostalgia for this unlikely family in this difficult, beautiful place that had unknowingly sheltered her. 3 months later, Ilara was walking through the heart of the Columbia campus. The briefcase her friends had given her was heavy with books and research notes. The air was cold and sharp, and her cheeks were flushed with the thrill of her work. Her reunion with Dr. Albright had been emotional. The elderly professor had embraced her, his eyes twinkling with delight. "I knew you'd find your way back," he'd exclaimed. They now spent their days in a joyful battle of wits, surrounded by ancient texts and linguistic maps, rebuilding her dissertation into something even stronger than before. As she rounded the corner of the great library, a black town car purred to a stop at the curb. A man in a familiar, perfectly tailored suit stepped out. Sterling Blackwood. He was flanked by 2 assistants and was clearly headed to a meeting in the faculty club, a building his name and his donations were inscribed upon. Their eyes met across the lawn. A complex series of emotions played across his face. First, the shock of recognition, then a flash of his old defensive arrogance. But this was her world, not his. Here, his power was meaningless. He was an investor, a name on a wall. She was a part of the intellectual lifeblood of the institution. He stopped walking. His assistants paused behind him, confused. He seemed to want to speak, to offer some kind of verbal acknowledgement, but for once in his life, the right words failed him. The man who wielded words as weapons was disarmed. Instead, in a gesture that must have cost his pride dearly, he gave her a single curt nod. It wasn't just respect. It was a concession of defeat, an acknowledgement that her world had a power his could not touch. Ilara looked back at him, the wind whipping a strand of hair across her face. There was no fear, no anger, no triumph. She simply saw him for what he was, a small man in a very large, very expensive suit. In his own destructive way, he had been the catalyst. His cruelty had forced her to find her voice again. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod in return, a final, silent closing of the chapter. Then she turned her back on him and walked up the stone steps of the library, leaving the billionaire to his world of finance and power. She was entering hers, a world of history, of language, of meaning. She had a new menu in front of her now, infinite and complex, and she was finally, wonderfully, free to read it all. So what is the real lesson in Ilara's story? It's not just about the satisfaction of seeing a bully get what he deserves. It's a powerful reminder that there is a deep, often hidden reservoir of talent, history, and dignity within every single person, regardless of their uniform or their job title. Ilara wasn't just a waitress. She was a scholar waiting for her chance to return to the life she had earned. Her story teaches us to look past the surface, to treat everyone with respect, because you never truly know the depth of the person standing right in front of you. It's a call to value the unseen and to believe in second chances, not just for others, but for ourselves. If Ilara's journey from humiliation to triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life story of justice and unexpected victory. Thank you for listening.